You know that heavy feeling you carry around? That weight in your chest when someone's name comes up in conversation? That instant tension when you think about what they did to you? What if I told you that the very thing you think is protecting you is actually the thing that's slowly destroying your peace, your relationships, and your ability to create the life you truly want? I'm talking about unforgiveness. And today, we're going to explore something that goes way beyond just saying, "I forgive you," and hoping the pain goes away. We're diving into radical forgiveness, and trust me, this isn't your typical forgiveness advice. Most people think forgiveness means letting someone off the hook. Most people think it means you have to forget what happened or pretend it didn't hurt. Most people think forgiveness is something you do for the other person, and that's exactly why most people stay stuck in patterns of resentment, anger, and emotional pain for years, sometimes decades. But what if everything you thought you knew about forgiveness was keeping you trapped? What if there was a completely different approach that could not only free you from the past, but actually transform your entire relationship with yourself and others? That's what we're exploring today. The 5 core principles of radical forgiveness that can literally change your life. And I mean that, not in some fluffy, wishful thinking way, but in a real, practical, scientifically backed way that addresses the root cause of why you're still carrying around pain from things that happened months, years, or even decades ago. Now, before we jump in, I want you to think about someone who hurt you. Someone whose actions still trigger you. Someone you thought you'd forgiven, but whose name still makes your stomach tighten. Got them in mind? Good. Keep them there, because by the end of this video, your entire relationship with that situation is going to shift. Let's start with understanding what radical forgiveness actually is, because it's completely different from traditional forgiveness. Traditional forgiveness is what most of us learned growing up. It's the idea that you forgive someone because it's the right thing to do, because you're supposed to be the bigger person, because holding on to anger hurts you more than them. And while there's some truth to that last part, traditional forgiveness has a massive flaw. It assumes that someone did something wrong to you, and now you're choosing to let it go. It keeps you in victim mode. It keeps the story alive that you were wronged, hurt, damaged by someone else's actions. Radical forgiveness, on the other hand, comes from a completely different place. It was developed by Colin Tipping, and it's based on a revolutionary understanding of how our reality actually works. Instead of forgiving someone for what they did to you, radical forgiveness recognizes that at the deepest level, nothing actually happened to you. I know that sounds crazy right now, but stay with me. Radical forgiveness operates on the understanding that everything that happens in your life, including the painful stuff, is happening for your growth, your healing, your evolution. It's not about denying that pain is real or that hurtful actions don't have consequences. It's about understanding that your soul, your higher self, actually orchestrated these experiences to help you learn something, heal something, or become someone you needed to become. This is where it gets really interesting, because when you understand this principle, you realize that the person who hurt you was actually playing a role in your spiritual growth. They were helping you heal old wounds, learn important lessons, or develop qualities like strength, compassion, or self-love. Now, I can already hear some of you thinking, but what about really serious trauma? What about abuse? What about situations where real harm was done? And I get it. This concept can feel threatening when you experienced genuine trauma. But here's what's important to understand. Radical forgiveness doesn't minimize your pain or excuse harmful behavior. It doesn't mean you should stay in dangerous situations or that boundaries aren't important. What it does mean is that even in the most painful situations, there's often a deeper healing happening. Sometimes we need to experience certain things to break patterns that have been running in our family for generations. Sometimes we need to learn to value ourselves enough to leave unhealthy situations. Sometimes we need to develop the strength and resilience that can only come from walking through fire. And here's the thing about radical forgiveness that makes it so powerful. It's not really about the other person at all. It's about you taking back your power. It's about you stopping the story that someone else has control over your happiness, your peace, your ability to love and trust. If you're finding this perspective shift helpful, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our content on personal growth and healing. We're building a community of conscious growth seekers who are ready to do the deep work of transformation. Let's move into the first core principle of radical forgiveness, and this one is absolutely foundational. The first principle is taking complete responsibility for your experience. Not responsibility for what happened to you, but responsibility for how you're experiencing it now. Most people spend years trying to figure out why someone hurt them. They replay conversations, they analyze motives. They build elaborate stories about the other person's psychology or childhood or circumstances. And while understanding can sometimes be helpful, it often becomes a way to avoid taking responsibility for your own healing. Here's what I mean by taking responsibility. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice about how you hold that painful experience. You can hold it as evidence that you're a victim, that life is unfair, that people can't be trusted. Or you can hold it as information, as a catalyst for growth, as an opportunity to develop qualities you didn't know you had. The person who hurt you is not in the room with you right now. They're not making you feel angry or sad or resentful in this moment. You are. You're choosing, consciously or unconsciously, to keep that pain alive through your thoughts, your stories, your interpretations of what happened. Now, this doesn't mean your feelings aren't valid. Of course they are. But it does mean that your feelings are coming from your thoughts and interpretations, not from the actual event that happened in the past. And that's incredibly empowering, because it means you have control over your experience right now. I worked with someone recently who had been carrying anger toward her father for 20 years. He had been emotionally unavailable during her childhood, and she had spent 2 decades feeling hurt and resentful. When she finally understood that her current pain wasn't coming from what happened 20 years ago, but from the story she was telling herself about what happened 20 years ago, everything shifted. She realized that every day she was choosing to keep that little girl alive inside her, who felt unloved and unworthy. She was choosing to interpret every interaction through the lens of, "I'm not enough," because that's what she had decided her father's behavior meant about her. When she took responsibility for her current experience, she was able to see that her father was actually a wounded person doing his best with the tools he had. She was able to see that his emotional unavailability had actually helped her develop incredible independence and self-reliance. She was able to see that the pain she had carried for so long was actually protecting her from having to risk being vulnerable again. Taking responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself. It means recognizing that you have power over your experience. It means understanding that your interpretation of events is creating your emotional reality, and you can choose different interpretations. This leads us perfectly into the second core principle of radical forgiveness, which is recognizing the perfection in what happened. And I know this one's going to be challenging for some of you, so I want you to really open your mind here. The idea that there's perfection in painful experiences doesn't mean that harmful actions are okay, or that people should hurt each other. What it means is that from the perspective of your soul's growth, everything that happens serves a purpose, even the painful stuff, especially the painful stuff. Think about it this way. Some of the strongest, most compassionate, most wise people you know have been through significant challenges. They didn't become who they are despite their pain. They became who they are because of how they chose to work with their pain. The betrayal that taught you to trust your intuition. The rejection that forced you to develop self-love. The abandonment that showed you your own strength. The criticism that helped you stop seeking approval from others. The loss that opened your heart to deeper compassion. When you start to look for the gifts in your painful experiences, something magical happens. The energy around those experiences begins to shift. Instead of being sources of pain, they become sources of wisdom and strength. I want to share a story that really illustrates this principle. There was a woman whose business partner embezzled money from their company and destroyed their friendship in the process. For years, she carried anger and resentment. She felt betrayed, violated, and stupid for trusting someone who turned out to be dishonest. But when she applied the principle of recognizing perfection, she began to see things differently. That betrayal forced her to develop systems and boundaries in her business that she never would have created otherwise. It taught her to trust her intuition, which she had been ignoring for years. It showed her that she was stronger than she thought and could rebuild from nothing. Most importantly, it revealed patterns in her life where she had been giving her power away to others. She realized that she had a pattern of trusting people without really knowing them, of ignoring red flags because she wanted to believe the best in everyone. The betrayal was actually a wake-up call that helped her develop discernment and healthy boundaries. When she could see the perfection in what happened, she was able to feel genuine gratitude toward her former partner. Not gratitude for the betrayal itself, but gratitude for the growth that came from it. And that's when the real healing happened. Now, recognizing perfection doesn't happen overnight, especially with big traumas. It's often a process that unfolds over time as you're ready to see it, and it's important to honor your own timing. Don't try to force yourself to see perfection before you're ready. Allow yourself to feel your feelings first. But when you are ready, asking questions like, what did this experience teach me? Or, who did this experience help me become? Or, what gifts came from this challenge? Can begin to shift your perspective in powerful ways. This brings us to the third core principle, which is understanding that forgiveness is really about self-love. This might be the most important principle of all, because it reveals why traditional forgiveness often doesn't work. When you try to forgive someone while still believing that they damaged you, diminished you, or took something away from you, you're actually reinforcing the belief that you're not whole. You're trying to forgive them for making you less than you are. But radical forgiveness recognizes that you are whole, complete, and undamaged at your core. No one can actually take away your worth, your lovability, or your inherent wholeness. They can hurt your feelings, they can cause you pain, they can create difficult circumstances, but they cannot diminish who you are at the deepest level. When you really understand this, forgiveness becomes much easier because you realize there's actually nothing to forgive. If no one can damage your essential self, then what exactly are you forgiving them for? This is where radical self-forgiveness becomes so important. Most of us are carrying way more judgment and criticism toward ourselves than toward anyone else. We're constantly telling ourselves we're not good enough, smart enough, strong enough, lovable enough. The person who hurt you probably triggered feelings that were already inside you, feelings of unworthiness, abandonment, rejection, or fear. They didn't create those feelings, they just activated them. And in a way, that's actually a gift, because it gives you the opportunity to heal those feelings at the source. I remember working with a client who was devastated when her husband left her for another woman. She felt rejected, abandoned, and completely worthless. Through our work together, she realized that her husband's actions had triggered a deep wound from childhood, where she felt abandoned by her father. The marriage ending was painful, but it wasn't really about her husband. It was about a little girl inside her who had never felt truly loved and accepted. When she began to give that little girl the love and acceptance she had always craved, the need for her husband's approval began to fade. She started to see that her husband leaving was actually freeing her from a relationship where she had been constantly trying to earn love instead of simply being loved for who she was. The ending of her marriage became the beginning of her relationship with herself. This is what I mean when I say that forgiveness is really about self-love. When you love and accept yourself unconditionally, other people's actions don't threaten your sense of worth. When you know you're whole and complete, other people can't make you feel broken. And here's something beautiful that happens when you approach forgiveness from this place of self-love. You stop needing the other person to be different than they are. You stop needing them to apologize, to change, to acknowledge what they did. Your peace doesn't depend on their actions anymore. Before we continue, I want to remind you that if this content is resonating with you, Sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message could really make a difference in their life. Sometimes we all need permission to approach healing in a completely new way. This leads us naturally into the fourth principle of radical forgiveness, which is releasing attachment to being right. This one can be really challenging for a lot of people because we often hold on to our anger and resentment as a way of maintaining that we were wronged. There's something in us that feels like if we forgive, we're somehow saying that what happened was okay. If we let go of our anger, we're admitting that the other person was right and we were wrong. But that's not what radical forgiveness is about at all. Radical forgiveness is about recognizing that being right is less important than being free. It's about understanding that your attachment to your story of what happened is keeping you stuck in the past. It's about choosing peace over being right. Here's what's interesting about our need to be right. It's usually not really about the specific situation at all. It's about deeper fears of not being seen, heard, or valued. When someone hurts us, part of what's painful is the feeling that our experience doesn't matter to them. We want them to acknowledge what they did, to validate our pain, to confirm that we matter. But when you're waiting for someone else to validate your experience, you're giving them power over your healing. You're making your peace dependent on their actions, their awareness, their growth. And that's a really vulnerable place to be, because you can't control other people. Releasing attachment to being right doesn't mean you're saying you were wrong. It doesn't mean you're minimizing what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It means you're choosing to validate your own experience and find peace, regardless of whether the other person ever acknowledges what happened. I think about this principle a lot when I consider family dynamics. So many people stay stuck in old patterns with their families because they're waiting for their parents or siblings to acknowledge how their behavior affected them. They're waiting for apologies that may never come, for awareness that may never develop. But what if you could find peace without needing your family members to change? What if you could love them and have boundaries with them without needing them to be different than they are? What if your healing didn't depend on their growth? This doesn't mean you have to maintain relationships that are harmful to you. Saying boundaries is actually an act of love, both for yourself and for the other person. But it does mean that you can set those boundaries from a place of love and clarity rather than from anger and resentment. When you release attachment to being right, you free yourself from the exhausting work of trying to change other people's minds. You stop collecting evidence of how wrong they were. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. You stop waiting for them to see the light and suddenly become the person you needed them to be. Instead, you focus on your own growth, your own healing, your own peace. You become responsible for your own happiness instead of making it dependent on other people's actions or awareness. This brings us to our fifth and final principle of radical forgiveness, which is embracing the transformational gift. This is where radical forgiveness becomes truly powerful, because it's not just about letting go of the past. It's about using the past as fuel for your growth and evolution. Every painful experience carries within it the seeds of transformation. Every person who has hurt you has also been a teacher, showing you something you needed to learn about yourself, about life, about love. When you can extract the wisdom from your painful experiences, you transform them from sources of suffering into sources of strength. This is where the concept of the law of attraction becomes really relevant. When you're carrying anger, resentment, and pain from the past, you're vibrating at the frequency of those emotions. You're unconsciously attracting more experiences that match that vibration. More betrayal, more abandonment, more situations where you feel powerless or victimized. But when you extract the gifts from your painful experiences, when you use them as catalysts for growth and healing, you begin to vibrate at a completely different frequency. You begin to attract experiences that match your new level of consciousness. More love, more respect, more situations where you feel empowered and valued. The person who betrayed your trust taught you to trust yourself. The person who abandoned you taught you to be there for yourself. The person who criticized you taught you to value your own opinion. The person who rejected you taught you to accept yourself. When you can see these gifts clearly, something amazing happens. You actually begin to feel grateful for the experiences that once caused you so much pain. Not grateful for the pain itself, but grateful for who you became because of how you chose to work with the pain. I want to share one more story that really illustrates this principle. There was a man whose father was an alcoholic who was emotionally and sometimes physically abusive. For most of his adult life, this man struggled with anger, depression, and difficulty maintaining relationships. When he began to work with radical forgiveness, he started to see how his father's alcoholism had actually shaped him in some positive ways. It had made him incredibly self-reliant and resourceful. It had given him deep empathy for people who were struggling. It had motivated him to break generational patterns and become a loving father to his own children. But the biggest gift was realizing that his father's inability to love him had forced him to learn to love himself. He had spent years trying to earn love from others because he had never received it unconditionally from his father. The pain of that drove him into therapy, into personal growth work, into developing the capacity to love himself in ways his father never could. When he could see these gifts clearly, his relationship with his father completely transformed. He was able to see his father as a wounded person who had done his best with the tools he had. He was able to feel compassion for the pain his father must have been in to need alcohol to cope with life. Most importantly, he was able to break the cycle. Instead of passing on the wounds his father had given him, he was able to use those wounds as the foundation for becoming the kind of father he had always wanted to have. That's the transformational gift. That's what happens when you use your pain as compost for your growth. You don't just heal yourself, you heal the generational patterns. You don't just survive your experiences, you transform them into wisdom. And here's something beautiful about this process. When you embrace the transformational gift, you often find that you want to help other people who are going through similar experiences. Your pain becomes your purpose. Your wounds become your wisdom. Your struggles become your strength that you can offer to others. Now, I want to be really clear about something. Applying these 5 principles of radical forgiveness is not always easy, and it's not always quick. Some experiences take time to process and integrate. Some wounds need to be honored and felt before they can be healed. Some patterns run so deep that they require patience and persistence to transform. But what I can tell you is this. When you begin to approach forgiveness from this radically different perspective, everything changes. Your relationship with yourself changes. Your relationships with others change. Your relationship with life itself changes. You stop being a victim of your past and start being the author of your future. You stop waiting for other people to change and start focusing on your own growth. You stop carrying the weight of old resentments and start feeling the lightness that comes from true freedom. Remember, radical forgiveness is not about condoning harmful behavior or staying in situations that aren't good for you. It's not about becoming a doormat or pretending that hurtful actions don't have consequences. It's about taking back your power to choose how you want to experience your life. It's about recognizing that you are so much more than what happened to you. You are not your wounds. You are not your past. You are not the stories you've been telling yourself about why you can't be happy or successful or loved. You are a powerful, creative, resilient being who has the ability to transform any experience into wisdom, any pain into purpose, any wound into strength. That's not just positive thinking. That's the truth of who you are at the deepest level. If you're ready to begin this journey of radical forgiveness in your own life, start with one relationship, one experience, one old wound that you're ready to see differently. Ask yourself what gifts might be hidden in that experience. Ask yourself what you learned about yourself or about life. Ask yourself who you became because of how you chose to work with that challenge. Be patient with yourself. Be gentle with yourself. This is deep work, and it unfolds in its own time. But every step you take toward radical forgiveness is a step toward freedom, toward peace, toward the life you're truly meant to live. Before we wrap up, I want to encourage you to watch some of our other videos on healing and personal growth. There's so much more to explore about how to transform your relationship with yourself and create the life you truly want. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our new content. The journey of radical forgiveness is one of the most important journeys you can take. It's a journey from victim to victor, from wounded to wise, from broken to whole. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to wait for anyone else to begin. You can start right now, right where you are, with whatever you're ready to heal. Your past doesn't have to define you. Your wounds don't have to limit you. Your pain doesn't have to control you. You have the power to transform everything that has happened to you into the foundation for everything you're becoming. That's the promise of radical forgiveness. That's the gift you can give yourself. That's the freedom that's waiting for you on the other side of your willingness to see things differently. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, you are more powerful than you know, more resilient than you think, and more worthy of love and happiness than you can imagine. The journey of radical forgiveness will help you remember that truth and live from that truth every single day.